Hi, this is Walker Evans of Columbus Underground. We recently sat down with William Murdock, the Executive Director of MORPC, to talk about Amtrak, LinkUS, housing, zoning, a whole bunch of different things. So here is our full conversation with William Murdock.
Tell us what MORPC is for the uninitiated.
Okay, thank you for the question. I'm William Murdock. I'm the Executive Director of the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. Our friends just call us by our acronym, which is MORPC. And we're the regional council for Central Ohio. So we help Central Ohio get ready for growth by planning for transportation, sustainability. We look at demographic change and housing and how that all comes together.
Great. So we're going to start with the big one first.
Okay.
Amtrak,
yes.
It's a hot topic. You know, people seem really excited. It's something we've been talking about in Central Ohio for 20 years at this point, trying to get it off the ground. No one wants to get their heart broken again if it doesn't happen.
Right.
How are you feeling? You're still feeling optimistic?
I'm feeling really optimistic as somebody who's been involved for a really long time in getting passenger rail to Central Ohio. Mm-hmm. So what's different this time is we have support from the business community in Central Ohio. The governor's office and the Ohio Rail Development Commission have encouraged us to go forward. And in March, there were 2 applications to bring passenger rail back to Columbus. What we call 3C&D, which is Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, Cincinnati, and then Midwest Connect, which is Chicago, Columbus to Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. Both of those crossing at the convention center downtown. Yeah. So there's a lot of enthusiasm about it, and the reason we're particularly optimistic is not just the political and the business support. We did a survey for our annual event, about a month ago. We partnered with Ohio State and the Dispatch, and it found that 90% of the respondents in a 15-county survey, statistically reviewed, supported passenger rail. So the enthusiasm of the public's there, and there's more money than ever from the federal government to do this. And if you look at Columbus, we're the largest region in the country that doesn't have it. And if you look at that from a glass half full standpoint, it means we're the best business case in the country because we're the largest market not on the national network. So all of those things, Walker, that makes me optimistic.
Cool.
So.
The Chicago, Columbus, Pittsburgh line, there was just a new application that went in for funding like within the past month?
Yeah, when the 3C&D went, so the state of Ohio submitted for 3C&D.
Yeah.
And then MORPC, in partnership with the city of Fort Wayne and partners along that whole route, submitted at the same time for Chicago, Columbus, Pittsburgh.
That's great.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, because we've had a lot of conversations on this.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
It sounds like there's also a lot of enthusiasm in a lot of those communities along these routes. Is that correct?
Yes.
Like Lima, I think, is one that...
Lima is extremely excited about it, but also from here to Columbus, Marysville and Dublin are really interested in it. Mm-hmm. If you look into Indiana, Fort Wayne is kind of driving the effort in the Indiana communities. Even when we look out east, Newark's excited about it, on off to Pittsburgh, going through Appalachia. We don't know where a stop might be, but there's excitement and support along that route that way too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So in February, the numbers were updated on the population growth, just to shift gears over to that.
Sure.
The number that we've been hearing for a little while now with the Insight 2050 study was that the Central Ohio region would hit 3 million people by the year 2050.
Right.
That's been bumped up to 3.15 million by 2050.
Yeah.
What was kind of the cause in that change, or did something change with your study, or just are we growing faster than we thought we were?
So we are growing faster than we thought we would be. So a big reason for that is Intel. Excuse me, but coming out of the pandemic, we also looked at changing demographic trends. We looked at other communities around the country when they've had big projects like Intel, what that means. And when all that came together, it showed about a 5% increase in what we were expecting. So 3 million to 3.15 doesn't sound like a lot, but that's 150,000 people. And that means that our growth now through 2050, we're expecting about 750,000. Yeah. And there's a range there, and this is what we're studying a lot. So we know we're going to grow. The underlying demographics are there. But when we project it out, a lot of it's going to depend on migration. And we get about a quarter of our growth from immigration. If that goes up or down, that could change. We've just started to see positive in-migration from other states. If Intel really brings them in, if the new Honda plant brings them in, Hyperion, that might accelerate. So we've got a statistical confidence interval around it, and it could be higher, it could be a little bit lower. I think, and it could be a little bit, by that I mean it could happen a little sooner. it means we got to plan for it and invest now.
That's how forecasting works, right? There's a spread.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. You mentioned that 0.15 doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually is.
Right.
One of the equators I've been using lately is to compare it to a city. So
Sure.
just off the top of my head, Dublin is our largest suburb.
It is
50,000 people in Dublin.
Yep.
It's 3 more Dublins.
That's right. I do the same thing when I'm in counties where I'm like, well, it'll be 3 more Gehannas or 3 more Dublins. Absolutely.
A big part of that, in addition to the transportation question, is housing. Are we building housing fast enough? What is the latest with that? I know you talk with a lot of different people within the city of Columbus, but all the different municipalities. What's the latest on kind of the push for more housing?
Yeah, so this is we're spending a lot of time on this right now. We are already facing a lack of housing at different levels of the market right now, especially in the low-priced or workforce or affordable housing. Mm-hmm. Growth is only going to accentuate that. So we're really worried about us falling further and further behind. So we've got a plan to build housing for growth, but we don't have enough for the population that's here. So we've got a lot of focus on that. There's an effort. 2 years ago, we did the regional housing strategy. Had 111 recommendations in a dozen submarkets, all these tools. We're in an effort now with City of Columbus, the Affordable Housing Trust, and the Columbus Partnership to look back at that study and see what's being done and what the gaps are and what needs to move. And so that's underway right now with a bunch of partners. We're leading the part looking at the regional tools. And what we've learned so far is we've learned there's a lot going on here or there, like a tool here, a tool there, but there's not a lot going on from more of a regional level. So the thing our communities are telling us is they don't have the capacity or the expertise to move as quickly as they want, most of them. Nor do they know how to plug into a regional network or regional tools. So there's a lot more that we could be doing on that standpoint. If you talk to the BIA, their numbers align pretty closely to ours. We're building significantly less housing than other metros our size, by like sometimes 50% less.
Yeah. So, it seems like with housing, the $1 million question, pun intended, is that everything just costs more. Labor costs more,
True.
Materials cost more, land acquisition costs more. So it sounds like there's no just one solution to just build more housing.
Right.
It's a multi-pronged approach. Is that fair?
No, that's really fair. And if you talk to some folks, they'll say, well, it's the cost of the regulation and the permitting. If you talk to others, it's the cost of materials. One thing that we add to that is when you're looking at where to put the housing, if the infrastructure and the roads are already there, that usually saves you money. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about the cost of housing in an area that doesn't have the roads or the water sewer, they have to pay for that. Right. If we're looking at things like LinkUS or looking at putting housing in infill or communities that already have the infrastructure, that should help put a cap on those costs because it's already sunk. Mm-hmm. So.
My next question was about LinkUS.
Okay, perfect. All right.
We've been following the studies really closely. One of the most recent news announcements over the past few months was that COTA is going to have a levy next year to help fund the project. It seems like a long way away, November of 2024. What sort of steps do you think need to be taken to get the public really on board to pass that levy to fund LinkUS between now and then?
It's a great question. So it seems like a long ways away, but it's not. Mm-hmm. It's really not. So when we think about LinkUS and the next step, so it's important to recognize there's a lot of work that's already been going on.
Sure.
So we have 2 corridors that are already in the process to do the planning so that they're ready to move forward when there's funding. We're working with Columbus and a number of other partners on what's called the transit supportive infrastructure, which is all the stuff that you build around transit lines, sidewalks, safety, housing, all of those things to make the transit even more viable. What we need to do when we're talking with members of the community is making it relevant. And we've got a lot of work to do. Like, we can talk as planners and say, well, it'll be BRT and we'll have the TSI and we'll go up the corridor, and that doesn't mean anything to most people. Mm-hmm. So talking about this gives access to jobs. This could open up new housing that's close to work or close to amenities or close to businesses. This helps to correct long-standing problems where the community hasn't done enough in certain neighborhoods to give them better transit, to give them high-quality access, to give them access to jobs. There's a lot of talking that we need to be doing to make it really relevant and connect to people. So I think we know the work is cut out for us, and we're ready to do it. So. Yeah.
Well, it's been really interesting to see, the studies and thoughtfulness behind LinkUS, RapidFive, the downtown program, the zoning initiative, and how all these things, they all work together. They all tie together. So it's great that it seems like everyone is trying to push everything forward, all in harmony. To back up to the zoning piece of it, Columbus has unveiled kind of the first phase of the zoning reform, which focuses on a corridor approach. I went to a recent zoning meeting.
Right.
Because that's how I roll.
You're talking to a planner, man.
Yeah.
So
I love it. Do you think the corridor approach is a good first step, or is it not enough to get us to where we need to go, because it still leaves a lot of single-family zoning laws on the table in a lot of neighborhoods that need density quickly?
That's a great question. So, and I'm a Columbus resident, so I'm really anxious and really interested about what they're doing. I think when you look at the size and the challenge that's ahead of Columbus right now, it's so big. When you talk about overhauling a zoning code that hasn't been updated in 50, 60 years, whatever it is.
For a 212 square mile city?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And we're continuing to add people as we go in new areas. I mean, the city itself added 100,000 people in the last decade, just the city. So that's a lot of moving pieces. It's a lot of complexity. So focusing on the areas of highest impact, which might be corridors when you're thinking about housing, because those are areas that might be ripe for redevelopment, ripe to add density. That's why we're looking at it for LinkUS. I think that makes a lot of sense, knowing that you got to follow that pretty quickly by looking at some of these other things. Ideally, it could just all be done at once and right away, but it's a lot more complicated, and I know the city really wants to bring community members along and really make it make sense. So I know there's a lot of good people working on it, but I think the corridor approach is not a bad one. So
cool. The big news about RapidFive with Dr. Acton exiting her role, heading the organization. I know MORPC is a partner in RapidFive.
Yeah.
Do you think that project is going to lose some momentum right now, or do you think the board and the team behind it is going to keep pushing things forward?
I think the enthusiasm is as strong as ever. And why I feel that way is because what Amy Acton did is she built an organization to take this vision and make it into something tangible. So she helped start the 501c3. She put together a really impressive, passionate board about these things, brought in $3 million or something like that in terms of commitment. And that is a heck of a start to move to the next phase. So I have nothing but admiration for. I think that as we're looking at this next step, there's got to be a quick pivot to moving from idea to implementing projects, and we're set up well to do that. So the board, Dr. Kirsten Carr and our team is on the board. We support it. All of our trails work has been thinking about it. We've been looking at it from transportation planning. We've been looking at how we can activate what they've been talking about. So everything we know is people are excited about it. That same survey that we did on passenger rail also asked people what things they wanted in their community, and the answers, and I'm generalizing a little bit, we can send you the results. Basically, they want all of the options, and trails are a big part of that. So, yeah.
Great. As an entity that works with a lot of different partners, a lot of different municipalities, large and small across Central Ohio.
85 of them.
85
I know.
municipalities. Do you think, Columbus obviously by far is the largest, and we have the largest burden to bear when it comes to improving a lot of these things. Do you think that some of our smaller suburban partners, or even townships or counties, are they going to carry their weight when it comes to things like building more low-income housing, or being amenable to a bus line going through a community that's never had a bus line before because there's some sort of negative connotation that's been historically perceived with stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a really great question and a tough one, because each of those 85 communities you work with, they have their own constituents, their own processes, their own history, their own character. So we got to work through that. What we're seeing, because we talk about this a lot, Walker, we plan for it, we show them the benefits, we look at how to navigate some of these issues, we're seeing a lot of enthusiasm in places you might not normally expect it. So suburban communities really thinking thoughtfully about how do we build housing at all different levels, how do we incorporate transit in a way we haven't thought before. It's not perfect, but there's certainly some really good signs around the region. I mean, you can look at places like Reynoldsburg or Whitehall and be absolutely inspired with what they're doing. But Dublin did a housing study, and they didn't just look at their own area. They looked at the whole Dublin school district and identified what they need to work on. They've got work to do, but they're thinking about it. Union County and Delaware County had housing task forces where they looked at these issues. When it comes to things like passenger rail, every place along the line that we've talked to is excited about it. So I've got a lot of optimism about it. I don't want to sound like it's not going to be a lot of tough conversations or it's not going to happen, but I think there's been a shift to thinking really thoughtfully and quickly about this. So,
yeah. And I don't mean to stereotype either, because every community is made up of people, and so that you get a wide, diverse range of opinions in every single community.
That's right,
Columbus included.
Yeah.
Something I've been thinking a lot about and would kind of love your take on is what constitutes a Columbus problem, and what is an America problem.
Oh wow!
So when we and I may write an opinion piece and kind of
go
thoughts on this, but I feel like a lot of times we beat ourselves up, or we spend a lot of time kind of self-hating because we don't think our transportation system is up to par, or we don't think our school district is up to par, or we think we have a problem with gun violence in our communities. But are those problems unique to Columbus? Because if you read the news in any other city, they're kind of run-of-the-mill. These are American problems. So I guess my question is, do we have anything truly unique as a problem that we have to solve in a vacuum? Or should we be looking at best practices or federal changes that need to help alleviate some of these problems that communities can't solve on their own?
That's a big question, Walker, and it's a multi-parter. But I appreciate you asking.
We could be here all day talking about.
Well, no, we could actually. I mean, and I'll get back to the problems part of it. But even when we're looking at demographics and growth, there are things that we are looking at that are purely local or regional, but then there are other things that are completely out of the region's control. They're national problems or issues to navigate. Increased death rate for a couple of years, immigration. That's not something Columbus gets to decide. What happens at the national level, we get to decide, though, on how welcoming our community is and how much we plug that in. So even with some of these national issues, it's about how we react to it. And when I think of Columbus and the region as it compares to other places, I think we're behind on transportation options. I think that's not a national problem. It is a national problem, but we are uniquely behind. For a community of this size, we don't have the options when it comes to trains or transit. We're working on it. That's something I think that's more unique to Columbus. Historically, we didn't get there. I think we've got a chance to do it now. And I feel really strongly about this, so I'm going to double down on it. If folks say that these things wouldn't work in Columbus, if they're thinking about 20 years ago, maybe less so, but we've added 250,000 people in the last 10 years, 500,000 in the last 20 or 30. So these things are much more relevant and urgent now, and we're much further behind. Housing is a national issue, but when we look, and we're subject to those national trends on costs and mortgage rates and all that stuff. When we look around at other regions that are the same size as us, and they're building twice as much housing, that means we have to do some thoughtful planning and thinking and looking at our policies to say, what aren't we doing here? If we want more housing, we're clearly not doing it as well as Indianapolis or Charlotte. There's some things there. So you named a bunch of problems. I'm going to stick to infrastructure and housing and environment. But
I feel like that public reaction, I see it very commonly where something happens and we say only in Columbus could something this bad happen, and it feels like those kinds of issues, regardless of what they are, feel very commonplace if you read the national news.
I agree. I agree. I guess what,
not to downplay any of them, but in the problem solving aspect, it's you have to look at it from a holistic perspective. Well,
if these things were easy, a lot of them would already be done. I think we're at an inflection point in Columbus, though, where and we see this with some of our community leaders. I certainly feel it, that we should raise our expectations on what we should expect. And yes, some of these things are national problems, but if we look at the housing market, we're not building the diversity of housing product that is happening all over the place. And if we think, we just can't do it here, that's Columbus, well, then we haven't looked at what others are doing. If we think about whether or not passenger rail will work here, it'll never work in Columbus. Well, there are cities our size where it works really well.
And smaller.
That's true. Yeah. So I think that's important. We have done some things that are really well done, though, that unique to Columbus, where the nation may not have the same, or the state may not have the same vibe or energy when it comes to quality of life or workforce or attractiveness. I mean, we've done a lot right. This is why we're growing and growing the fastest in the Midwest when other places aren't. There's something that we've done right here, so I don't want to let that go. It's not just about problems.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great. 2 final questions. One burning question.
Okay.
What is the most underrated Weird Al song?
Oh my gosh, that could get me in trouble, Walker.
I was going to ask this in the live conference that we did, but figured it'd be more appropriate for a personal interview.
Oh man,
Yeah.
Underrated. There
Yeah.
are so many.
Yeah, I mean, you could pick your favorite. Favorite is easy, but I feel like there's like little nuggets here and there that are like, that's a really good one that no one talks about.
I really like the I Lost on Jeopardy one. Do you know that?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
way
I know
back.
the whole catalog. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, what about you? What shouldn't we forget?
A lot of his original like style parodies, I feel like are kind of the underappreciated.
That's
so
true.
The more recent Bob.
Okay.
The palindrome song and the style of Bob Dylan is a really solid one. That might be like the most, because you listen to the lyrics and you're like, every lyric is a palindrome.
Yeah.
And you're like, this took some thought.
It does.
You know.
The man's brilliant.
Yeah.
His polkas are definitely underrated. Where he does these like polka medley tunes. Like there's so many of. Those are
fast
great.
Paced.
Yeah. Walker saw me at a Weird Al concert once. So.
Yeah.
Well, no wait. I saw you at a Weird Al concert once.
That was a great show.
It was. Yeah.
Final question.
Wait, before we go any further,
yes.
my first concert in life
Was Weird Al?
when I was 13 years old. Yeah,
Nice.
so this is deep, man. So,
We went to like the fan meet and greet. I don't know if I told you this or
No.
not. Like after that show, and I have an old vinyl copy of the Even Worse album where he's dressed as Michael Jackson, the Bad parody
of course,
album. On vinyl that I bought when I was like 10 years old.
Okay.
In like 1990.
Wow.
I think it's still by vinyl. And it's beat up and it's a mess. And we got tickets to the show and I knew the album was at my parents' house in Alabama. And I said, Mom, can you ship this to me? Because I want him to sign it.
Right.
And so I said
Did you get it?
Yeah, I said it in front of him. He's like, I haven't seen one of these in a long time.
I bet, no doubt.
And he's like
That's
looking
cool.
at it like the record's all scratched up.
Okay.
And, like, I listened to it a lot when I was a kid, and so it's signed now.
That's cool,
and
man.
I'll never sell it.
Oh no, you shouldn't.
Yeah.
You shouldn't store it in Alabama. You keep it up here.
Yeah.
So last question. I'm sorry.
Real
Yeah.
final question. How can people get more engaged in MORPC?
So we have a number of different ways. One is, of course, we've got our social media channels. We've got our website. But one that I like to recommend is we have a lot of different, for people who are leaders or aspiring leaders or want to be more engaged, we have a whole host of committees and task forces and work groups. There's a way to get engaged if you care about trails or data or transportation. So there's a lot there. And then one that's really practical is one of the things we do that folks don't often think about because we do so much planning and analysis is we also run programs that help low-income and vulnerable families with home repair and weatherization and energy efficiency. And I say that because if any of your readers have friends or family members or colleagues who are struggling with that, seniors on fixed incomes, we have free programs and we have capacity in them. So it's tougher than it used to be. Being a 5-letter acronym named MORPC, knocking on a door saying we're here to give you a free furnace, it's hard. So we need those relationships and those recommendations to help people because the resources are there. So,
Cool.
And did I forget anything?
Social
Okay.
media,
Yeah. Okay. Good. I started with social media. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.